Welcome everybody to this, the publication of A Gentleman of Limerick, the Francis Arthur story, a captivating historical account written by Michael Kelly. This extraordinary tale brings to life the story of Francis Arthur, a member of the influential merchant family whose name still graces Limerick's landscape today. The book will be launched by historian Paddy Waldron. But first, a word from the publisher, Dominic Taylor of the Limerick Writer Centre. Dominic Taylor.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends of literature and history. We gather tonight to celebrate more than just a book. We celebrate a story, a profound narrative that breathes life into a forgotten chapter of Limerick's rich historical tapestry. A Gentleman of Limerick, the story of Francis Arthur, represents our 184th publication since launching our community publishing program in 2009, a milestone that fills me and my colleagues at the Limerick Writer Centre with immense pride. Michael Kelly has crafted an extraordinary historical account that transports us to 18th century Ireland. Through the life of Francis Arthur, a wealthy Catholic merchant, we witness the complex and often brutal landscape of religious discrimination. Arthur was not merely a merchant, but a courageous advocate who used his privileged position to champion Catholic rights, knowing full well the danger that advocacy entailed. The book chronicles Arthur's harrowing journey, his trial on fabricated treason charges, the inevitable guilty verdict, and his subsequent banishment from Ireland. Michael Kelly's narrative goes beyond mere historical recounting. He resurrects real people, authentic conversations, and pivotal events, revealing how even the most affluent could be ruthlessly targeted by the ascendancy class. Let me share a word about the Limerick Writer Centre with you. Founded in 2008, we are a not-for-profit organisation with a singular mission: to nurture and support writers connected to Limerick. We believe in the transformative power of words. Through dynamic readings, engaging workshops, and impactful publishing initiatives, we create a sanctuary where every individual, regardless of formal training, can find the support to transform their ideas into compelling written works. Tonight I want to extend a heartfelt gratitude to several individuals who have made this evening possible. To Michael Kelly, first of all, thank you for entrusting us with this remarkable manuscript. To Paddy Waldron, who will officially launch the book, your support is invaluable. To William O'Neill of the People's Museum of Limerick, who graciously host us, and our dedicated volunteers at the Limerick Writer Centre, your commitment makes moments like these possible. To each reader here tonight, I invite you to delve into these pages. Within them you will discover not just a historical account, but a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring human spirit. Let us celebrate this book, a tribute to Francis Arthur, a gentleman who left an indelible mark on Limerick and on the pages of history. Gormagh.
Thank you very much, Dominic Taylor. Paddy Waldron has a keen interest in genealogy and local history. He has volunteered his time with numerous genealogical and historical organisations. He is a published author and has contributed many articles on genealogy to websites and journals. Ladies and gentlemen, Paddy Waldron.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you to Michael and Dominic for inviting me to speak here this evening. It's a busy time of year. This is book launch season in Limerick. LImerick had a book launched last week by his former schoolmate, the Bishop. Patsy Perrell is down there, had his book launched the week before by a county councillor, an elected councillor. Michael has to make do with an unordained, unelected, self-taught genealogist masquerading as a historian. I recognise myself in that description.
He even defrocked.
And I did prepare some notes, which the peril of speaking third at an event like this is that the people ahead of you will have said everything. I hope I have a few things to say that haven't been said before. I have been left speechless at book launches before when everything had been said by the other speakers. We've 3 authors to congratulate. I wish I could congratulate them all, but Patrick Edmund Arthur died 210 years ago. His younger sister, Margaret Jane, Mrs. Leahy, died 155 years ago. But we have the living author here, Michael, in the front row. I thought this manuscript had been handed down in the family, but Michael tells me it was preserved in Stonyhurst College in...
Well, not the manuscript of the book now. Just the story.
The manuscript on which the story is based, and Michael has added a lot of family background and other information to it. And this is the bicentenary year of the death of Francis Arthur, who died in Dunkirk. I think a lot of people died in World War II, but he died there of natural causes on his travels. Michael and I don't know each other quite as long as Liam Irwin and Bishop Fleming, who were in school together, but I checked back our emails. It was 13 years ago this week Michael first tracked me down. And the reason was Michael's great aunt, who had the wonderful name Adelaide Augustus Arthur, or just Aunt Addie to Michael and myself, was married to Willie Waldron, who was my great uncle. They married back in 1926. I'm just delighted to meet Paul, who's over there with his camera, Michael's brother, who I did meet in Limerick while I was growing up many, many years ago. The last time we met was at the funeral of another Waldron great aunt in Mount St. Lawrence back in 1992. The Arthurs and the Waldrons have more than that in common. You will learn from the book the Arthur surname first came to Ireland with the Normans, but it was adopted by a Dalcashian family. So they have completely different Y-DNA. You need to get the Y-DNA of all the Arthurs to see are they the Dalcashians or the Norman Arthurs. I have to admit the Waldrons have a similar history. My surname first came to Ireland in 1609 with the Ulster Plantation, but it was adopted by Muck-Waldrons and de Waldrehas from Mayo and Roscommon. And I'm not sure which branch I descend from. I'm still trying to figure that out. The Waldrons came to Limerick with the Royal Irish Constabulary, and 3 generations lived in Ellen Street and Patrick Street. I discovered when I read this book, Ellen Street is called after Francis Arthur's wife, Ellen Sexton. Patrick Street is called after Francis Arthur's father, Patrick Arthur. And Francis, as a young man, the subject of the book, came up with the idea of building these 3 streets, Patrick Street, Ellen Street and Francis Street, called after himself, on a floodplain. I thought it was a modern idea for developers to come into town and build on floodplains. The flood defences, I think, seem to be working. We'll see when the Opera Square is finished, is that flood-proof on the same site. When I started to read the book, I said, I've never heard this story before. And eventually I realised, no, it has been briefly committed to print before. Unlike Tony Brown there in the back row, I don't know Lenihan's history of Limerick off by heart. I don't think I've read it cover to cover, and I certainly haven't read the copious footnotes, but you will find Francis Arthur in one of those footnotes, which runs for 10 pages. But I had read that footnote before, because as I read on, I discovered I was researching the pedigree of a present-day celebrity who I think of as Alexander Kemal. Anybody know who Alexander Kemal is? You probably know him by his middle name, Boris. And you probably know him not by his grandfather's Turkish surname Kemal, from which he gets his Y-DNA, but from Osman Kemal's grandmother, Margaret Hannah Johnson. So Boris gets his surname. Like most British Prime Ministers, Tony Blair, John Major, none of them get their surname from their direct male line ancestors. But Osman Kemal married Yvonne Williams, whose great-great-great-grandmothers included a Limerick lady, Alicia Sexton, sister-in-law of Francis Arthur. And that's the sort of thing you pick up in the footnotes to Lenihan, or in Michael's book.
That's what I didn't know.
You didn't know that one?
No.
So you are a cousin of Boris Johnson. But we all know that far.
We shouted that from the roof.
It could be worse. It could be Donald Trump. So, as Dominic has said, you will learn from this book how Francis Arthur was forced by anonymous enemies to become a refugee in his own country. we might say in 1798, but he did go to London, and it wasn't until 1801 that the United Kingdom, not as we know it today, but as we knew it for over a century, came into force. So then he was definitely in exile in his home country. And I thought when I read this, that could never happen again. It happened because of a trial which started on the 23rd of June. Then my mind turned to the 23rd of June 1922, 124 years later. Limerick, Ireland was on the verge of civil war. It was the week before the Public Record Office was blown up. Probably some of the records of Francis Arthur's trial went up in smoke in that conflict. In Limerick at that stage, the Crown forces, whose predecessors are the villains of the book, had handed over the castle barracks to the National Army, to the pro-treaty side, and had vacated 3 more barracks which were occupied by the anti-treaty forces. And not quite on the 23rd, but on the late evening at dusk on the 22nd, it's the longest day of the year, it's bright here till well after 10 o'clock, a body of armed men, estimated at about 10 to a dozen, visited the homes of 4 members of the clerical staff of the Limerick Post Office. 2 of those houses were in Verona Esplanade, you might know it, it's about half a mile from where we are here. 2 were on the South Circular Road, a little further away. They were charged, allegedly, that they had refused to join a strike of post office staff 2 years earlier, April 1920, organised as a protest against the treatment of patriotic Irishmen in English prisons. All 4 victims ended up going to London, just like Francis Arthur 124 years to the day earlier. 1 stayed in London permanently, 2 came back to Dublin, only 1 ever returned to live in Limerick. Who were the 4 men who were banished from Limerick in 1922? The one who stayed in London was Thomas John Phelan. He was married, he had no family. I was wondering who are his next of kin today. At the time of the centenary of this event, I did a little bit of research. His sister's great-grandson is none other than Eamon Ryan, our Minister for another few days for the Environment, Climate, Communications, Transport, etc. 2 of the other men banished in 1922 were Adelaide Augustus Arthur's brothers-in-law, or would later be her brothers-in-law. One was my grandfather, Jack Waldron. The other was his identical twin brother, my namesake, Paddy Waldron. And like Francis Arthur, they thought they were loyal to the powers that be. Jack called his son, born in 1917, Patrick Henry Pierce Waldron. Paddy called his son in 1916, a few weeks earlier, Thomas MacDonagh Waldron. So you'd have thought they were as nationalist as they came at that time and wouldn't be run out of town, just like Francis Arthur. The first Waldron child was my father. Like Francis Arthur's son, he was Patrick. Like Francis Arthur's son, he became a barrister. Like Francis Arthur's son, his father was driven out of town. The one thing I did notice about this book, there's almost no commas in the text. And I said, well, the bit written by Patrick Arthur, who was a lawyer, lawyers deliberately avoid commas to avoid or to create ambiguity. Now, I knew I should have got a stapler to get my pages in order, page 5. And the other child called after Thomas MacDonagh, the other 1916 patriot, you will know him. If you studied Irish in school, you used the Waldron-Has English-Irish dictionary. He became Tomás the Waldron. For 10 years, Eamon Ryan and I sat in the same classroom in a Jesuit school, not Stonyhurst, but Gonzaga in Dublin. But it was only in 1922, 41 years after we left school, I found we had a connection to a Limerick event. The most bizarre coincidence of all is the 4th person run out of town in 1922. He was the postmaster. He was Richard Hetherington. He was a Protestant. He thought that this was a sectarian attack when he saw the masked men at the door, and he escaped by the back garden and left his wife to deal with the armed callers at the door, telling him to get out of town. So at first light on the 23rd of June, my grandparents had another knock on the door from their neighbour across the road, Mrs. Hetherington, whose maiden name was Margaret Anna Arthur. And she was from the Church of Ireland Arthur, so probably not closely related to Francis. Her poor husband had climbed over the back garden wall on Verona Esplanade into the grounds of the Model School and broken his leg and been lying there on the ground for 4 hours with a broken leg before they found him. I don't have enough to produce a book on that 1922 story, but if you look at wikitree.com, you'll look up Jack Waldron, you'll find my account of it. So the moral is that long before social media, victimization of people of principle by anonymous enemies was unfortunately commonplace. So let us hope that Francis Arthur's story and that 1922 story convince us that residents of Limerick should never again be banished as refugees, and that the city should instead become a place of welcome for refugees from elsewhere. I don't know whether Francis Arthur qualifies for a posthumous presidential pardon. We saw President Higgins recently pardoned Sylvester Poff and James Barrett, who were executed in 1883. So I don't know whether Michael has pursued that angle. But all that remains now is for me to declare this book officially launched and encourage you all to buy a copy for yourself and 2 or 3 for your friends. And congratulations.
Thank you very much, Paddy Waldron. Michael Kelly, born and raised in Clonmel, County Tipperary, is a retired primary school teacher and principal. His direct relation to the Arthur family through his grandmother, Molly Arthur, adds a personal touch to this historical narrative. Ladies and gentlemen, the author, Michael Kelly.
I have no idea what I'm going to say now, so please forgive me. Paddy, thank you for that. That was a Marv and Dominic and yourself. My family are related to the Arthurs. I suppose it's in the book, and I don't want to tell too much what's in the book. The main characters in the book were all real people. As I said, I got this from records that Francis' son kept in the Storyhurst in England, a copy of which I was given by the archivist there. And it's all built around the information that was in that, and then my own research into the Arthur family from before and what happened to him afterwards, to his death in Dunkirk. And what Paddy didn't mention was that he was in Dunkirk visiting more Arthurs. One thing, from my own research with the Arthur family, as far as I'm aware, and certainly it would appear so, that the Limerick section of the Arthur family actually originated in Ireland and were Arturic. You had Arthurs who came over with Strongbow, and they settled on the Limerick Tipperary border, but most of them were then moved by Cromwell to Clare, which you'll find a lot of those descendants now, and then the others came in with your ancestors. James the First, keep that one. And the other thing that you might not realise is that while Francis and most of the family were Catholic, some did convert. But there were members of the family in Ennis as well, in Clare. A brother of Patrick's was in business there, a man called Walter Arthur. So they spread themselves around Clare. Now, Francis himself, he was a very intelligent man, a very good businessman. But he had a weakness, I think, and that is, he was an honest man, and if he said something, he meant it. And he didn't realise that other people weren't as honest as him. And that basically is what led to what happened to him. And they asked me just to read something from the book, and I think it might give you an idea of just how, in some ways, innocent he was, that he never realised he was the subject of all of this, okay? And just what I've written here, it says, on Thursday the 24th of May, 1798, Father went down to the quays to oversee the unloading of one of the ships that had just arrived with the loaded timber from Norway. While there, a friend of his came along, and they began talking about the troubles that the United Irishmen were creating in different parts of the country at that time. His friend remarked that Limerick had been very fortunate so far because it was not experiencing any of the troubles that were tearing other parts of the country apart at the time. Now, it so happens that Lieutenant Colonel Cockle, who was the Assistant Adjutant General of the district, was standing quite close to Father, and he was talking to a fellow officer. And he must have heard what Father and his friend was discussing, so he spoke quite loudly to his companion in order to be overheard. That is not the case, for on Tuesday next, some persons will be taken up that will astonish people. Now, taken up meant arrested. Now, the whispering campaign against Father was coming into play in here, as many people by now had heard various stories about all different kinds of plots and conspiracies that father was supposed to be involved in. And sadly for father, some of that mud that had been thrown had stuck. It was around this time that the ordinary people, who had been hearing so much about all the different kinds of plots and conspiracies, that many of them did not bother to listen to the stories anymore. Since Lieutenant Cockle did not allude to anyone in particular being picked up, father showed no interest in what the soldiers were saying, as he assumed that it had nothing to do with him. Unfortunately, he never thought of asking the soldiers to whom they were alluding, although he did realise that even if he had asked them, it's unlikely they would have given them their names. Basically, despite all the stories, etc., that we'll talk about there, and an awful lot of mud had been thrown around on him, he never realised he had been 100% loyal to the king, which is more than a lot of the artists could say. But he was. And as I said, it's in the book, and I don't want to tell everything, but I mean, he proved his loyalty many times over. And yet still, because he annoyed the wrong man by, who was the, what do you call him, the second most important man in Ireland anyways. Earl of Clare, yeah, I can't think of his title now at the moment. It's the Earl of Clare. And he in fact was the son of a converter himself. His father converted to be a barrister. He converted from Catholicism, and he was a real out and out, let's get all the Catholics Protestant. He was not a nice man, but he was a very important man, and he did everything he could to get Francis. So I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoyed half as much as I enjoyed putting it down, I'd be happy. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Michael. A Gentleman of Limerick, the story of Francis Arthur of Limerick by Michael Kelly, is on sale in this very hall. So get thee to the books table, and in charge of it is our good colleague and friend Marion. Good night, folks. That's your very agent.